Ugh, that studio smells great today.
It really does, yeah.
Right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, no matter what time zone you're in. Welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Yes, welcome back, everyone.
A huge welcome to all of our Sip and Talkers tuning in today. We have a pretty wild conversation lined up for you.
We really do. It's a fascinating one.
Totally. So today on Sip and Talk, we are getting into this very specific, honestly, incredibly complex intersection of geopolitics and human psychology.
Yeah, political psychology is probably the best way to describe it.
Exactly. We're looking at Taiwan's political landscape. Specifically, we're going to break down the dynamics between the legacy party, so the KMT, the current ruling party, the DPP, and of course, the overarching unavoidable gravity of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
Right. And before we really get into the weeds here, I think we should just lay down our mission statement for today's conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, we are definitely not here to take any political sides. We are not endorsing any specific group or criticizing any nation.
Nope, not at all.
The goal today is just to deconstruct these massive, complex political algorithms. We are going to use factual history, some political science, and, a healthy dose of cold, hard realism to just look at how things actually work.
Right, just to foster some independent thinking.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy to get caught in the spin.
Exactly.
So, to start us off, there's this concept the locals call small cleverness.
Small cleverness.
Right. And to really grasp this, we had to look at a pretty recent political maneuver regarding the legacy party's their at-large legislator list.
Right, their election roster.
Yeah. But for the Sip and Talkers who might not be super familiar with how that specific voting system works, can you just quickly break down what an at-large list actually is?
Sure, yeah. So think of it basically as proportional representation.
Okay.
Instead of voting for just a single person in your local district, you cast a vote for a political party. And based on the total percentage of votes that party gets nationwide, they are awarded a certain number of legislative seats. So before the election, the party publishes this ranked list of candidates.
Like a priority list.
Exactly. So if they win, say, 10 seats based on their vote percentage, the top 10 names on that list get a job.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But if you are sitting at, number 30 on that list, you are statistically dead on arrival.
Right.
You are absolutely not getting a seat.
Okay, so that context is super important for what actually happened. Because the Legacy Party was facing this immense pressure from Beijing, the overarching power in this scenario.
Yeah, heavy pressure.
Right. Beijing wanted them to insert specific, let's call them friendly candidates onto this election roster. Because Beijing wants a back channel, right? They demand to see their preferred people in actual positions of influence.
Right, which is just a classic pressure tactic.
Totally.
I mean, superpowers use this all the time to test the loyalty and really the execution capability of their regional counterparts.
But here is the crazy part. The Legacy Party didn't just hand over a top 5 guaranteed spot.
Yeah.
They tried to use this small cleverness.
Yes.
They technically complied with Beijing. They put the requested name on the official list, but they buried it all the way down at the 30th spot.
Right, basically burying it in the backyard.
Exactly.
Okay.
They mathematically guaranteed that this specific person would never see the inside of the legislature.
And the underlying logic there is just fascinating to me.
It is wild.
Because they genuinely thought they were threading the needle,
Yeah.
By burying the candidate, they think they're appeasing their local Democratic voters by not actually handing over any real political power to Beijing.
Right.
But simultaneously, they think they're appeasing the superpower just by getting the nail on the official paperwork.
But wait, that just seems completely counterintuitive.
Oh, it is.
Because they technically complied, but practically they delivered absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
If we think about this in the tech world, that would be like some failing legacy hardware company that is just desperate to maintain a relationship with a massive tech giant.
Oh, yeah, that happens all the time.
Right. So the giant demands access to their system, so the hardware company builds this fake backdoor API.
Just a total dummy port.
Exactly. It looks like an access point on the technical docs, but it never actually triggers. They pretend to comply just to, survive another financial quarter without getting crushed.
That is a great analogy.
Or, honestly, to use a more universal example, it's like a high schooler pretending to invite the unpopular kid to a party. Yeah. They write the kid's name on the back of a sticky note And then they hide the sticky note behind a toilet in the boys' room.
Right, so they can say, hey, your name was on the guest list.
Exactly. I invited you, bro. You just didn't find the list.
It is so transparent, and the API metaphor perfectly captures that facade of compliance. But, actions like that have immediate real-world repercussions. Because the candidate who was buried at that 30th spot, they didn't just quietly accept their fate.
Right. They aren't just going to sit there.
No, they simply walked across the street to a rival political party. In this case, a highly agile, traffic-hungry startup party, the TVP.
The startup just straight up poached the asset.
They did. They scooped this person up and immediately gave them a VIP, guaranteed spot at the very top of their own list.
Oh, wow. So it completely backfired.
Entirely. But the real failure of this strategy is how the overarching power, the CCP, interprets the whole event.
Right.
Because Beijing doesn't look at that 30th spot and think, oh, wow, what a nuanced, clever diplomatic maneuver.
Right. They aren't impressed.
Not at all. They look at it and realize that the legacy party has completely lost its execution capabilities.
Right.
In the eyes of a superpower, if you cannot deliver tangible results, your little clever tricks are just proof of your irrelevance.
You're a failing API.
Exactly. You're obsolete.
So I am really trying to wrap my head around this. Why would a political party, which is, composed of highly educated, incredibly experienced elites, genuinely think a transparent trick like this would work against a massive global superpower?
Well, it really comes down to a deeply rooted psychological framework. It's known as the agent illusion.
Which is the agent illusion.
These legacy elites hold on to this deeply arrogant belief that they are the absolute only ones who possess the sophistication to talk to the authoritarian bully.
Oh, wow.
They genuinely believe they can perfectly balance the scales between a modern, demanding democratic electorate and a rigid authoritarian regime.
But that is a total illusion.
Completely.
I mean, pushing back on that with another tech analogy, it is like a junior programmer fresh out of some 6-week coding boot camp, sweating over their keyboard, thinking they can control a massive, self-evolving, multi-billion parameter AI algorithm with a single basic Eiffel's line of code.
Yes.
If this, then that. Right. They think, well, if I just leave this one little port open, I can manage the beast.
Yeah.
But the AI is light years beyond their basic code. And the CCP is an incredibly complex, ruthless geopolitical algorithm.
Very ruthless.
It is not going to be contained by a meaningless hidden spot on a voting roster.
No, of course not. And taking that a step further, it reveals this highly symmetrical culture DNA algorithm at play within these political dynamics.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So you have an entity that acts overwhelmingly subservient, cautious, and polite to the ultimate strongman.
Right.
They manage every single word carefully so they don't offend Beijing, but simultaneously they are incredibly arrogant and domineering toward their actual peers, like the current ruling party in Taiwan.
Okay, wait, help me picture this. Why would you act so subservient to the massive superpower, but then act so aggressively to your literal peers?
Well, how would you visualize it?
Honestly, it feels like every American high school movie I've ever seen. It's the classic sidekick-bully dynamic.
Oh, the sidekick bully. Walk us through the mechanics of that.
Okay, so you have the kid who follows the actual terrifying school bully around the cafeteria, right?
Right.
When the main bully is around, the sidekick is holding their towel, nodding eagerly at every joke, absolutely terrified to step out of line.
Total subservience.
Exactly. But the exact second that's said, the main bully leaves the hallway. The sidekick turns around, puffs out their chest, and starts shoving their own classmates into the lockers.
Wow.
Yeah. They borrow the aura of the strongman to punch down at their peers, mostly because they are way too afraid to punch up.
That is a very visceral image, but it's incredibly accurate. However, to maintain our objectivity here,
Always.
we have to recognize that this behavioral algorithm isn't just unique to Taiwan's legacy elites. It's actually a mirror effect.
A mirror effect.
Yeah, the CCP uses the exact same psychological algorithm on the global stage.
Wait, really? The main bully plays the sidekick role, too.
They absolutely do. Just look at Beijing's geopolitical operations. When they are dealing with the United States, which is a true peer competitor and an overarching superpower, their actions are highly calculated.
Right, very careful.
There is intense risk management, incredibly carefully worded diplomatic exchanges, and a very deep respect for the physical boundaries of that power.
Right, they don't cross certain red lines.
Exactly. But the moment they pivot to dealing with smaller neighbors, like, say, the Philippines in the South China Sea or Lithuania over a minor trade dispute,
They go all out.
They immediately switch to wolf warrior tactics. They use aggressive economic coercion, physical intimidation with Coast Guard vessels. They basically bow to the giant and step on the ants.
Wow, so it is the exact same operating system,
Yeah.
just deployed on a completely different scale.
Precisely.
But okay, if your entire geopolitical strategy is based on constantly backing away from the big bully while simultaneously pretending you are still the one in charge, where does that physical retreat actually end?
Well, that brings us right to the historical context of their retreat.
Right.
Back in 1949, after losing the Chinese Civil War, the Legacy Party retreated from mainland China to the island of Taiwan, and they brought over 2 million soldiers and civilians with them.
A massive relocation.
It was. And for decades, their official narrative was that they were still the legitimate government of all of China, just temporarily relocated.
Right. Okay, let's Americanize this geography for a second, just so you, the listener, can really feel the sheer scale of this thought experiment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine if a political faction lost the entire continental United States in a civil war.
Right.
They lose California, they lose Texas, the Midwest, everything, and they are forced to retreat to New York City.
A huge loss of territory.
Massive. But then they lose the city, too, and they have to retreat to Roosevelt Island in the East River. Or, actually better yet, they retreat all the way across the country to Alcatraz in the San Francisco Bay.
Alcatraz. A tiny, isolated rock with virtually no natural resources.
Exactly. So picture this scene. The entire political party leadership, all the old guard generals, they are crammed into the abandoned, crumbling prison ruins of Alcatraz.
Okay.
They were sitting on folding chairs, eating cheap hot dogs. They sat at this little podium, turn on the microphones for a dead serious international press conference, and they declare to the world, "We are the legitimate government of the United States, and we strictly forbid Alcatraz independence."
That is amazing.
Right. Meanwhile, tourists from California are just sailing by on ferry boats, taking pictures of them.
The visual is darkly humorous, I'll give you that. But it actually highlights a very dangerous phenomenon in political science.
What's that?
It's called the loss of reality.
Loss of reality.
Yeah. When a political entity stops relying on core, tangible values, like having a compelling vision for the future or holding actual geographic control, and instead relies entirely on the mercy of a superpower and its own minor cleverness, it loses touch with the ground beneath its feet.
It becomes delusional.
Basically, it becomes a spiritual victory. They lose the physical territory, they lose the political reality, but they convince themselves they are still winning the ideological war simply because they haven't surrendered their historical title.
Wow.
Wow.
But if your whole political identity is based on pretending you still own the mainland while you are physically trapped on Alcatraz, how do you treat the people who were actually born on Alcatraz?
And that brings us to a massive cultural clash happening right now.
Yeah. We can call it the tenant versus landlord dispute.
This cuts right to the absolute heart of their modern identity crisis.
So there was this recent incident that really lit a fire under this whole debate. A prominent local celebrity essentially went on a public platform and said, if you don't like Taiwan or you don't want to be Taiwanese, you can leave.
Right.
And the legacy elites were absolutely furious. They were outraged. But why? Why would a seemingly straightforward comment cause such an explosive, angry reaction?
Because it fundamentally threatens their entire worldview.
How?
They do not view themselves as tenants on the island. They don't think of themselves as renters who can just be evicted by the Democratic majority if they don't like the building rules.
Right. They see themselves as the owners.
Exactly. They view themselves as the superior legacy owners of the property who are just temporarily staying in a hotel until they can reclaim their massive estate. So when the actual modern residents say leave, it just shatters that entire illusion of ownership.
It really is a form of, well, legacy system gaslighting.
Legacy system gaslighting.
Yeah. Let me bring this back to tech for a second. But first, I think we need to explain the 1992 consensus because that's the historical agreement they always point to.
Right.
What actually is this consensus in factual terms? Like, what does it mean?
Well, in 1992, representatives from both sides of the strait met and essentially formed a verbal agreement. And the core of it was an agreement to agree that there is only one China.
Okay, sounds simple enough.
But they intentionally agreed to disagree on what China actually meant.
Wait,
Yeah. Beijing meant the People's Republic of China, and Taipei meant the Republic of China. So it was this linguistic firewall designed to allow them to do business and talk without having to resolve the massive existential political dispute.
let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
They both agree they are one country, but they completely disagree on who is actually in charge of that country.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, that sounds exactly like running Windows 95 in the modern era.
Oh, here we go.
No, seriously. Let's cast the CCP as Microsoft, right?
Okay.
Microsoft announced 2 decades ago that Windows 95 is completely dead. They do not support it. In fact, Microsoft announced that the new required update, which is called One Country, Two Systems, is going to completely format your hard drive and erase everything you have.
Right. The terms of service have fundamentally and aggressively changed.
Completely changed.
Yeah.
But these legacy politicians, they stand in front of the users, the citizens, and they keep gaslighting them. They say, look, as long as we all collectively pretend we are still using Windows 95, the hackers won't attack us. Just don't look at the new update.
Just ignore the giant warning on the screen.
Right. They are demanding that millions of people pretend to live in a defunct operating system just to maintain their own illusion of control.
It is a great analogy, but let's pause there for a second.
Okay.
Because we really need to execute a hard pivot to objectivity right now.
Fair enough.
Because while it is incredibly easy to critique this behavior as gaslighting or, small cleverness, we have to look at the other side of the ledger.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
There is a very robust, highly pragmatic defense of the legacy party's historical and current strategies. We really cannot just write them off as foolish or delusional.
All right, I am ready to hear the other side. Defend the Alcatraz retreat. Defend Windows 95. Let's look at the facts.
Okay, first, let's reframe that 1949 retreat.
Okay.
It wasn't an act of cowardice. It was an incredibly difficult, calculated, strategic relocation.
Strategic relocation.
Yes. By making that very harsh choice to retreat across the strait, they preserved critical national capital, intellectual talent, the gold reserves, and invaluable historical artifacts.
Right, like all the stuff in the National Palace Museum.
Exactly. And they took a resource-poor island and engineered an undeniable economic miracle. I mean, they laid the foundation for the semiconductor dominance we see today.
That's true. I mean, you look at companies like TSMC, you look at the global impact, with the whole GPS Act thing happening in the U.S., Taiwan's tech industry is vital.
Absolutely. They built one of the Asian tigers.
I really can't argue with the economic reality of that. They transformed the island into a global tech powerhouse.
Furthermore, they managed something incredibly rare in global history.
What's that?
A largely peaceful transition from a single-party authoritarian martial law regime to a flourishing, vibrant, multi-party democracy.
Oh, yeah.
And that does not happen by accident. It requires a certain kind of cold, pragmatic calculus and intense institutional restraint.
Okay, I see the historical value. I really do. But how does that justify the Windows 95 gaslighting today?
Well,
I mean, is it possible that what looks like subservience to the bully is actually just classic small state realism? Like how Singapore masterfully balances the U.S. and China?
that is precisely their argument. They argue that the 1992 consensus is not gaslighting at all. It is a brilliant geopolitical firewall.
And a firewall?
Yes, it created strategic ambiguity. By using that linguistic trick, they bought Taiwan decades of peace.
Right, they bought time.
Exactly. Time for the economy to explode, for the democracy to mature, and for global supply chains to become so heavily dependent on the island that a war becomes economically unthinkable for the entire globe.
So they're basically saying you can laugh at our outdated software all you want, but it kept the missiles in their silos.
Exactly. They look at the tragic situation in Ukraine, for example, and they argue that pure ideological defiance without the absolute military power to back it up just leads to devastated cities and lost generations.
That is dark, but very real.
Their core argument is that survival maximization is the highest moral duty of a leader. If you have to bow to keep your people alive and prosperous, you bow.
Man, that is an incredibly heavy perspective.
And we also have to defend the dual identity aspect of this.
The cultural side.
Yes. This idea of being culturally Chinese but politically Taiwanese, or retaining a deep historical connection to the mainland, is a valid, lived reality for millions of people.
Right, it's their actual heritage.
It is not a parasitic mindset. So when someone says, if you don't like it here, leave, the legacy elites argue that this is actually an exclusionary, deeply intolerant form of democratic arrogance.
Because you are erasing their identity.
Right. You cannot just erase a massive part of a population's historical identity just because the modern political winds have shifted.
Wow. Okay, that really complicates the picture. It is definitely not just a simple narrative of good guys versus bad guys.
Not at all.
It is competing visions of how to stay alive in a very, very dangerous neighborhood.
It is a clash of fundamental paradigms.
So Synthesizing all of this,
Mhm.
what we are really looking at in today's conversation is a massive generational collision.
Yes.
On one side, you have the modern egalitarian mindset of the younger generations. They view political parties as peers. They view their nation as an independent equal on the world stage. And they just flat out refuse to accept the logic of the schoolyard bully.
Right. And on the other side, you have the cold, pragmatic, long-term survival calculus of the legacy elites.
The Alcatraz generation.
Exactly. They believe that history is written by those who survive. Even if surviving requires uncomfortable compromises, strategic ambiguity, and yes, a bit of small cleverness.
It is the ultimate tension.
Yeah.
Do you stand tall and risk getting knocked out, or do you bend to the system to ensure you live to see tomorrow?
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Lay it on us.
We live in an era that is completely dominated by algorithmic echo chambers. Our social media feeds demand absolute moral clarity.
Oh, totally.
You have to be 100% on this side or 100% on that side. Nuance is often punished by the algorithm.
Everything has to be black and white. You are either the absolute hero or the ultimate villain. There is no in-between anymore.
So, in a world that demands absolute clarity, is there still room for strategic ambiguity? Can a political entity survive by refusing to draw a hard line, or by refusing to definitively choose a side? Do you eventually just make yourself irrelevant to both the superpower and your own citizens?
Like, does the linguistic firewall eventually just become a prison?
Exactly.
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Because if you stay on Alcatraz long enough, eventually the ferries just stop coming by.
It is a profound geopolitical dilemma, and it is exactly why we do these shows.
Yes, it is.
In a world of absolute information overload, we don't need standard prepackaged answers. We need the ability to think independently.
Right, to look past the surface-level political theater.
Exactly, and to see the underlying logic and causality of geopolitics. Because only by seeing the reality can we make clear-headed judgments.
Well said. Sip&Talkers, we want to hear from you on this one. What stands out to you about this dynamic?
Yeah, let us know.
Do you think the small cleverness is brilliant survival? Or is it just a slow march to irrelevance? Write in, drop a comment, and share your own thought experiments with us. We really do read everything.
We do, and the perspectives you all bring to these topics are incredible. We love diving into your feedback.
Thank you all so much for spending your morning, afternoon, or evening with us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the Sip and Talk podcast so you never miss a deep dive into these topics.
Please do.
And before we go, a quick shout out to our old friend Mickey. Head over to YouTube and subscribe to his channel, Mickey to Life.
Yes, definitely check it out.
He has some amazing new travel vlogs up that you're definitely going to want to see.
It is always a good time watching Mickey's adventures.
All right, that is a wrap for us today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye, everyone.
Take care, guys.